Hello, and welcome to episode 115 of Prose. This week, confront an ugly man trying to deal in beauty, and give in to baser desires and let go of moral principles. Though most content coming from Prose is not suited for young ones or those that are easily offended or triggered, this week's two short stories do deal with two pretty horrific men, particularly the first short story. Please listen with extreme caution. I encourage you all to go follow the show on social media under @ProsePodcast across platforms. If you are enjoying the show, please click that 5-star review button on Prose wherever you're listening. It does help the show out. No, really. For easiest access to the show, use that same podcast catcher or app that you are using to subscribe. And lastly, maybe go on over to Prose's Patreon page at patreon.com/ProsePodcast and consider supporting the show there. Both heaps of gratitude from yours truly and a little thank you swag come with that deal. Thanks for listening. Let's get to the tales, shall we? This week we have 2030 and Weaponization. Enjoy. "2030, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. There in Occitanie, at 8:30, the evening breezes swelled off the Mare Nostrum. This place was once the wilds for the Romans, a place of darkness and light, myths come to life, a place of conquests and defeat. The beaches of Cap d'Agde continued to lure the bold for 2 millennia. It was no Montpellier. It was no Marseille. It was something better. A nook of a beach far away from the hordes of nouveau riche and the everyday families that avalanche into the south of France each and every summer. But there, in Occitanie, at 8:30, the evening breezes swelled off the Mare Nostrum. Yes. And the photographer was inspired to take his life far to the north in Paris. The photographer had wanted to be the painters of old, making his best attempts at composing the still lifes of the masters, transferring those framings and aesthetic sentiments from canvas onto film. He loved the bounties of nature, or so he said. Fresh fruit and flowers were his first subjects with whom he became besotted. Then, the photographer went even more down the road of the bucolic, leaning heavily into landscapes, farm animals, wild animals, pigeons, and anything he could find on his walks through the rural rolling hills that sprawled beyond the coastline villages he frequented on his holidays. The preponderance of all things natural in his paintings come-to-life style work eventually took the next step toward the glories and wonders of the world and readjusted to include men, women, boys, and girls. Milkmaids, farmers' hands, seafaring fishermen, net menders, beggars on the streets. The regular Joe and Jane were the only reasonable way to extend the bucolic into the human form. Why turn the lens onto the person of power? Eventually, the photographer began to focus more and more on the female form. He would go shopping for muses in their early teens, aiming for blondes with bright blue eyes and pale skin. He wanted the skin to be so white that it bordered on translucent in the harsh natural lights that he preferred. He became obsessed with innocence and being above the fray of the human condition. By the time he had come to that point of female-focused art in his career, most parents of these young women would balk at refusing him to photograph their daughters, nieces, and granddaughters. Why would they turn down an internationally lauded artist? Why would they deny their young charge the honor and privilege of becoming a muse to the world, potentially gracing magazine covers worldwide, and living forever as framed prints in some of the most celebrated galleries of the world? The innocence and calmness of his original pastoral still lifes via film were now abandoned, if not overtly, then covertly. His aim for timeless looks to his shots continued, of course, eschewing modern trivialities showing up in those shots. The photographer loathed machines, such as cars and trains. He grew angry when it became increasingly difficult to shoot without getting modernistic buildings or garish advertising billboards in his favorite spots there in France. He sought to help the denizens of this cringeworthy planet to escape from that nastiness that is humanity and modernity. Cruelty and violence and hyperbole were non-existent. The unfiltered light and unspoiled innocence were meant to transport all viewers to a dreamland and a place from their youth that had escaped them through the tumult of age. The soft focus with smudging, for which he became extremely famous, helped him in this push for the dreamlike and nostalgic. The cherubic heaven that the photographer tried to weave together with his images over a career spanning half a century proved problematic in the end, at best. It proved horrific at worst. Within the first quarter century of his career, the photographer was accused of being insensitive toward his subjects, shooting girls far too young to make something implicitly erotic. As he continued his self-proclaimed march toward the pursuit of visual perfection, the photographer's methods became more and more questionable, and his models became younger and younger. He did not see any problem with this. Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita also sought purity and perfection and explored similar themes, and Nabokov had gone down in history as a master and artiste of the highest order, made immortal by this grand search. The photographer ran from his native England, where his permanent residence was, and he shunned his beloved United States, where he made most of his money, in an attempt to outrun the accusations and potential legal charges that seemed to be crouching his way. His work with young girls stopped. His career as an aesthete that ignored and broke the pedantic bourgeois rules that the world cobbled together out of fear of the truths of the universe was slowed. He continued to frame his work as he always did, but his lawyers, his friends, his family, even the publishers and biggest patrons told him to slow down, to pause, if but for a moment, for the world to take its breath and reevaluate his works of the past. Surely, they would come to their senses. Then, one Friday night while the breezes swelled off the Mare Nostrum, old stories came crawling back out of the darkness. Some of his muses from ages ago began to tell tales of improprieties. Accusations that the photographer had been denying for the better part of 40 years. Accusations that had been put down and disproved by the law for the better part of those 40 years. Yet these women continued to beat that drum. He'd held the line that he'd done nothing inappropriate. Most of his models had held that line too. On that Friday night, while the breezes swelled off the Mare Nostrum onto the beaches where he used to shop for his angelic beauties, the photographer felt the confines of his Paris home to become increasingly dark and oppressive. The chief muse that accused him had done so in her best-selling book. Best-selling book! Even her own mother had said the accusations were sewn from whole cloth, but that did not stop the Pandora's box of curses from being reopened. That which was once passé became first perverse, then outright pornographic. The art itself became criminal. The magazines and the galleries and the agents stopped calling. The police stopped calling too. The statute of limitations for the crimes for which he was accused were passed, almost doubly so. That Friday night, while the breezes swelled off the Mare Nostrum so very far away from the City of Lights, the photographer thought of what his detractors and accusers would say. He thought of what the newspapers and history would say. They would decry their being condemned to a lifetime, an eternity of silence. But at 88, the photographer couldn't continue to see himself painted the villain. Good or bad, wrong or right, he did not feel that he owed the world any explanation for himself or his art. Let them all be damned. One Friday night, while the breezes swelled off the Mare Nostrum down at the once fertile hunting grounds of the photographer, the 88-year-old took 3 bottles of his medication and secured a plastic bag around his head. Visions of angelic faces and soft lights and bounteous apple trees and nets bulging with the day's catch and sagging barns and so much more flashed in quick succession as he felt death come for him so gentle and so sudden. That Friday night, the 25th of November 2016, while the breezes swelled off the Mare Nostrum, so far to the south of Paris, first responders and police found the photographer, clearly the victim of his own hand. The accusations seemed to echo all the more loudly in the wake of the suicide. The light and love the old man, the would-be soothsayer, the sometime artist and aesthete tried to birth into the world had become something dark and harmful. Certainly, the accusations were just that. Nothing had ever been proved against the photographer. For every one accuser, there were 2 defenders. And yet, this death screamed of a man who sought beauty only to infect and degrade those he used as paving stones to create that avenue toward the divine. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. Thank you for listening to 2030, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. Please stick around For our second and final short story this week, Weaponization, in which we delve even further into the darkness of humanity. Weaponization, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. The news of the extreme restriction of the H-1B, H-2B, J-1, and L-1 work visas made Jerome sick on so many levels. The overtly racist and anti-American positioning of the current administration infuriated him. His own family had, not so very long ago, been immigrants themselves. Over the course of a century, he and his ilk had fought for and achieved a better life than their progenitors had had in the far-flung places they'd all come from before heading to the U.S. Plus, there was just the human indecency of it. The reasoning behind the restrictions was disgusting. In fact, as he mulled over every element of the policy shift, Jerome couldn't help but become more and more heated. However, that anger was lessened when he began to think of Maxime. That Eastern European fuck had no business in this nation. Sure, yeah, he had come for education, but he had gotten that, both secondary and post-secondary, in its entirety, a decade ago? Now what did he do? He worked at the high school from which he graduated doing damn near nothing. Save sleeping with newly hired, relatively naive younger teachers and doing a piecemeal set of jobs that could be done better by others and for less money. Jerome was fully cognizant that he was rather biased against Maxime. The pedantic pissant had fucked Jerome's girlfriend behind his back and then slowly weaseled his way into a relationship with her. Certainly, in the end, Jerome thought that maybe Maxime had done him some sort of veiled favor, though inadvertently. After all, Christine had shown her true colors a la Maxime's cock, saving Jerome a marriage, some kids, a heated divorce, and all the fallout that comes with an end to such a relationship. That sort of enlightened thinking did not come very easily to Jerome, though. And God knew he did not forgive and forget easily, if at all. Maxime represented everything that Jerome thought was bad in the world. A living, breathing attestation of the ills of the human condition. This paragon of egocentrism and self-worship made the places he frequented and people with whom he shared life worse off by simple virtue of his being present. His humor was crass and hurtful. His interests were superficial and inane. His work ethic was scattershot at best. He drove drunk. He hit women. He verbally abused everyone, the kids at the school most of all. Hell, he didn't like animals. The list was never ending, really. Therefore, the disgust that Jerome felt for the plight of all the amazing people that were seeking nothing more than a chance at life, a bite at the American dream, no matter how elusive it so often proved to be, that disgust was all but silenced, if not quelled, by his loathing of this bad actor. If the world were rid of Maxime, the world would be better for it. Jerome had dreamt of harming the man for the better part of half a decade, and that fire for harm had not cooled. However, Jerome was, at his core, not a violent man. Though he was cynical and far from a humanist, he did not openly root for hurt for people. Except Maxime. Jerome thought Maxime could use a bit of pain and fear instilled in him to crack his seemingly impervious self-obsession and narcissist's confidence. Before he sought to do some harm without throwing a punch, Jerome went on a run. He listened to his favorite songs. He tried to clear his mind. He tried to work through the ideas of anger he still harbored toward Maxime. With every step, though, Jerome's teeth began to grind more and more, and his indignation rose up again in full force. The cocky smiles, the overtly gelled hair, the relative worthlessness in his occupation and to his institution, the disdain for the feelings of others, the covert racism and misogyny, the cliché come-to-life toxic masculinity, the money over people aim, the applauding this fascist regime's continuing strengthening. By the end of 10 kilometers, Jerome had come to a decision. He would use the villainous arm of the state to lay low this asshole. There was some beautiful irony to it. What with Maxime's vocal celebration of the Nazi-esque policies that were becoming more and more brazen with each passing month. He'd be rounded up by the brown shirts he cheered from the comfort of his faux leather couch. Jerome took a deep breath, and he dialed the number. 1-866-555-2323. An automated voice that seemed far too friendly spoke up almost immediately.
Hello, and thank you for calling the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency in conjunction with Homeland Security investigations. If you are calling to access our tip line, please press 1.
Jerome pushed the 1 quickly before he could change his mind. A few garbled techno noises later, a woman was chiming in, much kinder and more human than the first voice.
Hello, this is Agent Darla Thompson. Are you calling to report suspicious or criminal activity?
No, ma'am. Well, yes, ma'am. I mean, I don't really know. I'm calling to report someone here on a work visa who really isn't a necessary worker. Like, anyone can do his job, and he has no real business being here. I hate saying that out loud, but it's just how I...
Oh, sir, you have called the right place. It sounds like you have found someone taking advantage of our system and weaponizing the good graces we try to show the needy of this world. Don't you worry one bit if you'll just give us a few more details. We will happily look into this matter for you. Now, what's the name and address of this individual in question?
Thank you for listening to Weaponization, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. All sounds you have heard through both stories this week come from either YouTube's free audio library, freesound.org, or are of my own creation. Those taken from YouTube and freesound.org are being used under CC 0 1.0 public domain dedication licenses. That does it this week for Prose. I certainly hope you enjoyed the tales, though they were leaning to the dark side. It is October after all, so maybe that's appropriate as we creep toward Halloween. At any rate, as you go about your week, And as we wait for 2 weeks' time to pass until we see each other again for some more tales, love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is, always stranger than fiction. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.